Okay, what's up? Things might look a little bit different today because I forgot my little phone tripod thing. Lol, whatever. Today I'm having a test blend, pond blend coffee, which is going. It's my first test blend, but I think it's actually quite good. It's beans from India, Thailand, and Vietnam, roasted by Arkady Coffee. Um, and an Afghan. If y'all know what the Afghan is, everyone from New Zealand knows it. We had to make a bunch of food for this event, which in the end we were kind of like, do we even actually want to do food at an event? Lol. And now we've got a bunch of food that we can do whatever we want with, which is cool. Yeah, it's good. I feel like it's going to stick to my teeth though. So what are we thinking about now? Bro, I'm thinking about what is the fabric of life? Like what is the actual material that we're working with? And that's kind of the key question for anyone. And it's a question that doesn't have an answer. But it's like the exploration of the question itself is the process of life or something. And maybe if you're not exploring that question, then you're not really living. You know, it's easy to give like prop answers to the question of what is life, or what is the fabric of life, or what is the universe made of, or what is it that makes me me. But ultimately, any answer that you can put into language is not going to be the answer, you know? Because the things that exist in language are only the things that we can share externally. And that has a huge amount of practical use. But ultimately, it's the finger pointing at the moon. You know, the finger is not the moon. I was talking about this with my wife's cousin is staying with us at the moment. And she's younger than us. She's like 25. And maybe she's just starting to think about what the fuck am I going to do with my life. But she was asking me about meditation, and like, you know, we got to talking about, you know, what is me? Are my thoughts me? She was saying like, maybe if you can crack, like maybe the path to enlightenment is developing your thinking. Like you have all these things that you receive from the outside and arrange into a system that suits you. And maybe taking that to the nth degree or whatever is then enlightenment. And while I think this is a good process, I think enlightenment itself is the opposite. You know, it's like the realization that what you are and what consciousness is can never be encapsulated in a system. And maybe collapsing that system into a self-sufficient loop of consciousness or something. You're going to have to forgive the language because it's not something that necessarily works with language. But so that, you know, like everyone says, consciousness recognizes itself as itself without the auxiliaries of language and world. But I mean, it's easy to say that the fabric of life is consciousness, but it's not necessarily easy to recognize how that plays out and experience it, because we become so dependent on the tools that we use to manage experience that it's easy to forget experience itself. But the thing that really interests me is the individual quality of consciousnesses, each of our consciousnesses respectively, and how that plays out, the playing out of it, and the sheer capacity for variation in how consciousness can play out. And then on the other side of that, the sheer lack of playing it out on the part of most people in the world. Because you can just see people's level of avoidance. You know, like Jung says, the ego will go to the most ridiculous lengths, you know, to avoid seeing the truth of itself, or whatever. To avoid reality. Which is weird, because it's like, what the fuck else is there anyway? Like, you know this joke, like, if you think it's expensive to invest, wait till you get the bill for not investing. You know, wait till you see how much you're losing by sticking to this, like, safe, structured, enclosed habitat. Like, it's a trap to think that there's no risk in avoiding risk. You're just delaying the risk and letting it build up into something that gets less and less manageable. You know, like if you put your energy into avoiding risk, then you're not putting your energy into being able to cope with and manage risk. So your capacity for risk gets weaker and weaker. And the risk itself, in a way, gets stronger. Because you're... You know, it's a metaphor, but like if you imagine there's a designated amount of risk in a lifetime, and you can chip away at it if you start early and reduce it over time. But if you don't do it, then the risk stays there and it builds up, and then you have to deal with it all at once. Maybe that's why people die. I don't know. But it's like, the point is though, that when you interact with the fabric of life, it's like self-fulfilling or something. Like the way you interact with it produces the quality of it and then becomes the fabric. And maybe without that interaction, it doesn't exist, or depending on the level of interaction or engagement, it obtains more or less reality. But you can only achieve this if you kind of take a leap of faith in a way. And, you know, people kind of look down on the word faith because there's this battle going on between science and religion, whatever. But faith is a mechanism. It's a state, like it's a state of being. It's not like a, yeah, I'm gonna go to church and do what they say because then I'm gonna get to go to heaven or whatever. That's just such an obscure narrative to me. It's like you can be in a state of faith or a state of paranoia, basically. And the scientific state is a state of paranoia and doubting everything until you can really, what's the word in English? Ascertain it. Which is funny too, because most people aren't ascertaining it for themselves anyway. They're, accumulating data from outside sources until they're satisfied with the answer, which is then just dependent on your biases, so whatever. And then also ascertaining things in itself, if we take like a kind of quantum model of consciousness, is self-fulfilling. The consciousness, the observer is producing the reality, or at the very least, the experience of it. So the answers or the models that you are satisfied with, of course you're satisfied with them because they're the models that you're satisfied with. But it's kind of like a self-sufficient system that doesn't have full feedback with reality because it's got blocks on it. But once you start to accept your experience and go into your experience as your own and observe the world of your experience and your experience of the world as your own and as yourself, the wonder of it is so irreplaceable. It's amazing to me that people would opt for a closed down, regulated, but safe version of reality when they could have the version of the world that is completely catered to everything that they could ever want and need. Know what I'm saying? Because it's like a catch-22. Like, if you try and get the thing without taking the plunge, there's no way to get it. But if you take the plunge, then it's not even a plunge or something. Zizek talks about that quite a lot, these kind of paradoxes that we create trying to get the thing without the thing. Like chocolate flavored laxatives. Or like, what was the other one? Oh, there was one about condoms. But like the trying to get the effect without the cause, kind of. Like we want to get the outcome without the process. And without realizing that the process effectively is the outcome. Like, it always bothers me that you can take a gondola up to the top of a mountain when like the whole experience of looking out from the top of the mountain is about having climbed it. You're not doing the thing. If you want the experience of looking up from the top of the mountain, you're shooting yourself in the foot by taking the gondola anyway, because you're not getting the experience. It's like people want this experience of nature. Like in New Zealand, there's all these nature tourist opportunities, but now they're watered down for people by making them more accessible to more people, so more people can have this experience. But then by doing it, you're making it not the experience. Like, we've got all these versions of success that are watered down external versions of success that are more accessible to more people, but then they take out the whole element of self and self-expression and self-risk, self-engagement, that would make the experience of success fulfilling. And that's kind of what the fabric of reality is about for me. You have to cultivate your fabric of your reality. It's physically impossible and metaphysically impossible for someone else to do it. If someone else is doing the work, it doesn't have any bearing on your fabric. And if you're not cultivating that fabric, there's nothing for you to stand on to see further, to gain further insight, or to elevate yourself, or like climb higher. Seeing people cutting corners and undercutting people or cutting people off to try and get somewhere, as if your success has anything to do with my success. If anything, more successful people makes the world better for more people. And collaborating on success and building an ecosystem of success and a collective fabric of success is the way to more success. But obviously, if you're fixated on materiality, which is another thing, it's like you have to ask what that even is in order to talk about it. Because if we're going to have a discussion about, material versus immaterial, or physical versus metaphysical, we have to understand how physicality is produced in the first place in the universe. And if we as a species even don't have the answer to that, or we have fairly conclusive answers that generally agree across all disciplines, including science now. Yet we insist on this concept of materiality that we've effectively proven isn't real. But anyway, if you're focused, you can only buy into this competitive version of success if you believe that the material world is primary, and that it's what you do on the outside that matters. But just don't see any point in that. It seems so clear to me that so many people who have external material versions of success can just seem so unhappy and so lost. And people who have nothing or not much materially can just seem so comfortable and happy. It just seems obvious. But there's this separate ecosystem of a material external language of not just success, but the workings of the world. That's like clearly a trap that people get stuck in. You know, we've got these images of success that trigger us to go outside ourselves and convince ourselves that we want those things. That's a mystery. How do we what is the mechanism that makes us give up our kind of like personal path through the world in favor of this like shiny image of success or fulfillment or recognition or validation that just has nothing to do with us, respectively? That's wild. That's wild, bro. Like, what even is it that we think we're risking by being ourselves? You know, because, like, I've experienced this too. This kind of, like, fear of being seen and being judged or whatever. But why? You know, it's just like a thought loop we get stuck in. But if you tap out of those kind of thought loops, like anxious thought loops, they don't even add up. Like if you go through a process logically about whether it's worth it to care what people think about you. I don't know. Maybe someone can tell me. Maybe someone can tell me why it makes more sense to follow a track about people caring about what people think about you versus taking your own direction. I mean, obviously you can go too far in the other direction and not care at all and spiral completely out of touch with society and community. We all know people like that. But I don't think that people who really spiral out are really in touch with their, usually, you know, really in touch with their path through the world either. Because I think if you have a really stable connection with yourself, then you can let go of the things that you need to let go of in order to also be a part of society and part of the kind of collective frameworks that we use to manage the world. So it's also like a loss of touch with self and purpose if you can't be a part of society. You know, it's like it's the same kind of resistance going in the other direction. Because it's probably also a problem with, you know, like a fear of being seen. like a different kind of mask or whatever. Yeah. Like we find these mechanisms to create distance, whether it's through false validation or kind of like rejection based on the same kind of pretenses, which are kind of like gaps in your fabric of reality. You know, like if you see it as like a weave and everything that you do is kind of like a line or a stitch in the fabric or the quilt of your life, then yeah, avoidant behaviors create gaps and make it harder for you to connect with not just the world but yourself. And a stronger and more stable connection with the world is a reflection of a stronger and more stable connection with yourself. And yeah, being accepted is not complete engagement with the world if you're not engaging with it as yourself and showing up as, you know, not bringing your weaving style to the kind of collective fabric of the world and society. Which I think is, you know, people treat us like the world and society and the spaces that we live in like they're facts or like untouchable, you know? And I kind of think about this idea, you know, I've written a little bit about it, which I think of like graffiti. Like the cool thing about graffiti is that you're like, well, this is my environment, I'm gonna do something to it. Like I'm gonna change the way it looks, and you can kind of say the same thing about vandalism, which I'm not necessarily encouraging, but like, and I don't think we do really live in a real democracy. But if we do value ideas like democracy, then it is my environment, and it's also my responsibility to change it the way that I see fit. And I think some people are not frustrated enough with how much our environment lacks. Like, I don't know if frustrated is the right word, but so many people are so out of touch that they can accept the severe imbalances in our environments. And so out of touch that they'll go through these hugely roundabout detours to try and affect change or kind of pretend to affect change, you know, like protesting. Rather than working more directly on reality itself. Like my friend came to stay with me last year and we were talking about like, you know, like I'm like more impatient and more have a tendency to be frustrated with things that I notice in the world, which is fine, whatever. But I was like, you know, does it bother you how how few people are really conscious of what they're doing or whatever? And he was like, they just haven't suffered enough. And that's something I really take into account a lot now. Because it's like, they probably haven't suffered enough. And like when you have suffered enough and get sick of it or bored of it, then you start to make change. Which makes suffering not such a bad thing. I mean, I think there is unnecessary suffering. Because I think we could suffer a little bit and be like, okay, that sucks, you know. But it means that suffering is what's leading us to consciousness. So that's fine. But yeah, maybe we collectively haven't suffered enough. Or gotten bored enough. Like we can't allow ourselves to get bored now. Like we have to have all this like stimulation. Which is, you know, like escapist mechanisms as well. But like it's so cool when you see someone who's like just so bored of what's happening in reality that it's like, just change it. Why aren't we changing it? Like everyone who's doing something really cool is just seeing what is lacking. You know, like everyone has an innate tendency for what they realize or recognize. And just seeing what is lacking and doing it, like doing something about it, or, you know, being the change you want to see in the world. Like it seems so obvious to me that even in an external societal sense, being successful and having an impact on the world, a crucial element is being different. But then, like, the majority of people see someone successful and look up to them and they're like, okay, I'm going to just be like that person and then I'm going to be successful. Which is just going back to the same problem, reproducing the same problem of not expressing yourself, not cultivating the fabric of your success. You know, like, it doesn't have to be meditation or spiritual practice, but every moment that you spend investing in the quality of consciousness or chi or energy or whatever, that, or matter even, that makes you you, this the more grounding or footing or foundation you have for establishing that externally in the world as well. And in the opposite sense, the more, or, you know, it's the same, but the more time you spend looking at what other people are doing and comparing yourself, the more you take away from that foundation. But the problem with these kinds of conversations is that people who have not done any internal work and have no sense of what it feels like to put energy into yourself and see it develop and start to come into shape and come into fruition, just have no sense that this whole thing even exists. So it's like, why would I put time and energy into something I can't see when I could put energy into this model of work and stability and success that I can see or has been proven or that I'm convinced of by the messages or stories that we have in society? Which is a good question, but then it's also a question of, is what I can see the most important thing? You know, we can also see things like war and genocide happening. So are we taking that as a proven model of success? Maybe we are. I mean, like, the models of success or stability that we operate on in society are based on violence. And so maybe we are reproducing less than ideal patterns and systems just because they're what we can see. But if you think about it the other way, as in what we can see is already there, there's not necessarily any reason to put energy into building it. What isn't there, what can't see, I mean, it is literally potential. The things that you don't see around you. And also the things that you kind of crave that you can't get from the world in the state that it's in now. Those are all things that you can't see that exist in kind of like the ether or in chaos. that we suppress by reinvesting in the established structures or the visible things or the visible patterns, the proven patterns of the world. And that's kind of how consciousness gets stuck in, these cages or traps or patterns or structures and become non-self patterns. Because, yeah, right, yeah, it's like, like neural connections or like ridges, like canyons or something that get carved out over time, and then it's just easier to flow down them rather than forge out your own path at the expense of being who you really are. Because it's also funny, because it's like you have all these defense mechanisms about your life and fear of death, but then you spend your whole life avoiding life and avoiding who you are and living the life that you could really be living if you were living it as yourself. So it's like, what are you so afraid of? Like that the you that is not you is gonna die. Like the fear is probably that you'll die without expressing yourself and without fulfilling yourself. But then because of that fear, you avoid doing the living. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy anyway. Anyway, keen to hear what people think. I mean, like, I'm so interested in what people's internal experience is like. Although it's hard to communicate. But like, I did this and I had this outcome, or I did this and that made me feel like this. I feel like those are the conversations we need to be having, not like, oh my god, Trump's such an asshole, or like, Yeah.